EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within and our continuing series for the re-release of Season 1. We're up to Episode 5, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Now, as you know, we're doing all of this in support of the MGM Plus docuseries Let the Devil In, which is based on this season of the podcast that we're covering. And I am thrilled to announce that as of this taping, Let the Devil In is currently number 1 on the MGM Plus platform. So, thank you to all of you who I'm sure are the reason for tuning in, for getting the MGM Plus subscriptions, for watching, for reviewing the shows, for commenting on the shows. I'm humbled and I'm eternally grateful for your support of the podcast from day one up through and including the TV version of the show. So thank you. Now, about this episode. Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. It's not just the title of the episode for reasons that we'll get to, but it's also probably my favorite poem of all time. It's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of my favorite poems of all time, by that great sage of the New England woods, Robert Frost, whose poetry I grew up on. And the reason that I love this poem so much is how it has changed over the years of what it means to me and how I've been able to interpret it and reinterpret it. So I went over one of those interpretations in the podcast, and there's a whole new one that I have now. But when I first heard the poem as a child, I loved it. I didn't really understand it. For me, it was a guy who was just hanging out in the woods on his way home and liked watching it snow. Because if you grew up in an area where it snows a lot, you kind of understand that simple enjoyment of sitting outside while it's snowing. It's beautiful and it's relaxing and it's peaceful. And if it's at night, it's a little spooky. If it's during the day and you're a kid, it probably means you're home from school, you have a snow day, and so you're happy. And so that was my first connection to the poem, was how much I loved a good snowstorm. And as I got older and things started kind of jumping out to me, it became more ingrained in my psyche and into my, I guess, personality. So the poem, if you'll indulge me, the rhyme scheme of the poem is AABA, BB, CB, CC, DC, DDED, which means the third line of each stanza establishes the main rhyme scheme for the next stanza, for the following stanza. So here we go. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So that third line ends with here. So the next stanza, my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Beneath the snow and downy flake, the darkest evening of the year. So flake is the third line. So the next stanza, he gives his harness bells a shake to see if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. So sweep. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So you can interpret that on its face. Like I said, a dude traveling home, it's snowing, he loves the snow, maybe it's the first snow of the season, who knows, and he's just enjoying himself, enjoying a quiet time, maybe before he gets home to the chaos of his family and kids running around and having to do stuff and chores and work and all that. He's just kind of taking a moment to himself, okay? There's that great moment in a late 80s Ron Howard movie called Parenthood, where Steve Martin is playing a young dad, and he's married, and they're all out at a restaurant or something, and he's got young kids that are like still in car seats, okay? And there's this great scene where it's chaos, okay? He's trying to get the kids, and they're fighting, and they're like, get in the car and do it, and strapping them in, and kids are, I don't want to, and they're throwing stuff, and they're spilling their sippy cups, and he finally gets them all like seat belted in and buckled in, and everyone's safe, and his wife is in the car, and he shuts the door, and he just takes a moment, and he walks around the back of the car, and that's his like vacation, okay? and then he gets in and the chaos is back. But for those few seconds, man, and I've lived that, dude. Every parent has lived that, okay? And so we're always looking for a respite, right? A harbor in the storm, okay? And maybe that's what it was for this guy in the poem. He just wanted to sit and watch it snow because it's beautiful. And then, I read it over and over again as I'm growing up and I get into high school. And I have just the very beginnings of an adult understanding of life and of what things are all about. And a line stood out to me. I remember the first time I went, oh man, I get it. The lines in the third stanza, the only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. Anybody who has lived where it snows in the winter a lot, like anywhere in the Northeast or anywhere else on the planet, I hope anyway, you understand how incredible it is to be completely alone outside when it's snowing and it's so quiet that you can hear the snowflakes as they're landing on the ground. Like, that's a really beautiful moment to connect with nature, okay? And for Frost to just write that down. The only other sounds, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. So you could hear the wind blowing, and when the wind stops, so you could hear the wind blowing, and when the wind stops, you're able to hear the snowflakes as they hit the ground. It's a really cool moment. And I don't remember the last time I experienced that, and now I really miss it. So, but it was also in high school, my senior year, where I had a teacher, and we were learning about Frost. We were exploring his poems, and that's where he said, well, what if it's about a guy who just buried a body in the woods? I mean, such a Jersey thing to say, right? What if it's a guy dumped a body? Huh? Whoa. And that blew my mind. It was like, whoa, that totally makes sense, okay? The darkest evening of the year, like the dark moment of the soul, and how he's nervous and he's reassuring himself in that opening stanza. Whose woods his are, I think I know. But his house is in the village. He's not going to see me. Like, I'm cool here. I'm cool. And that's what I kind of cover in the podcast. But then, I have a family, and when my kids were young and we were doing Christmas all the time, and I would read them a selection of poems like their whole lives from before they even understood language. I was reading poetry to them, especially Frost. And so it just happened to coincide around a Christmas time that I'm reading Stopping by Woods. And then I'm like, man, this could be about Santa Claus. If you really look at the poem and break it down and try to ascribe those understandings of the holiday and what it's all about and how we understand Santa Claus, it lines up like perfectly. Whose woods his are, I think I know, because Santa knows who everybody is in the world. But his house is in the village, so he's not going to see me, so they're not going to make me, right? They're not going to say, yo, Santa's over there. Like, I'm safe here. Okay. So the only big separation is a horse instead of reindeer, but let's take that leap because it's fun. So second stanza, my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Now, although it says horse instead of reindeer, also in that stanza for me is the clearest evidence that it could be about Santa Claus because of the darkest evening of the year. What he's referring to there in this interpretation is the winter solstice. And the winter solstice, way back when, was the biggest celebration of the year for the pagans because they were an agricultural people and they would celebrate. Yes, this is the longest, darkest night of the year, but the days are about to start getting longer as of tomorrow. So we can feed our families. We made it through the worst of it, okay? So when Christianity came in and just absorbed all of these pagan cultures, they're like, oh, hey, you're already celebrating then, we celebrate this now, okay, cool, so we'll just keep celebrating at this time of year. And December 22nd of the solstice became December 25th, Christmas Day. Still right around the same time. So that's a pretty clear indicator that this could be about Santa Claus. And then the horse gives the harness bells a shake to see if there is some mistake. He's like, yo, there's no house here, man. We've got every house in the world that we have to go to. So why are we stopping? We're wasting time. Come on, big guy, let's go. And then just the imagery of the sleigh bells ringing. I mean, it's a Christmas carol. That just screams Christmas to me. And then when we get to the end, whereas in the initial interpretation, it's just a contemplative kind of meditative, the woods are lovely, dark and deep. And then with the murdering kind of interpretation, it's very different. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, like I can hide secrets there. And with the Santa Claus one, it's more of a longing. Like, gosh, he just wants a break. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, right? Promises to every kid in the world that they wake up to stockings and presents under the tree, right? And then, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. That repetition of that line just underscores the fact that he's got to go around the whole world. At least that, obviously what we believed as Santa Claus as kids. So I really love when poetry evolves like that over time. And you could look at that rhyme scheme, and it's not very sophisticated. It's often used by poets for hundreds of years, okay? But that's the genius of Robert Frost. The outward simplicity that hides an inner complexity that is revealed slowly over time as the reader evolves and matures and grows. There's that Stoic principle that says, you never step into the same river twice, because the river's always changing and you're always changing. And so when it comes to, you're really in the hands of a master with someone like Robert Frost, and it's evident in this poem here for those reasons. And so it's accessible for a kid because the rhyme scheme is easy and it rhymes, okay? And so that makes it just easier to understand what's going on in terms of poetry. But then the complexity of the subject matter is there, so you can enjoy it and really explore it at different stages of your life. And who knows what the poem's going to mean to me 10 or 20 years from now, because it's changed so many times. So one of the greats, and this is one of the greatest examples of the great Robert Frost. So stopping by woods on a snowy evening, chose it for this episode because of how much shit just happened in the woods when we were growing up. Not only because Tommy killed himself in the woods and probably escaped into the woods, and because Clinton Road is just all woods everywhere. And I knew the woods of my town like all my friends did. I knew them like the back of my hand growing up. And so many, like, through the woods, go through the woods to this house or to this house or to here or to the fort or to whatever, bike trails through the woods. Everything was through the woods. I had a friend of mine in his 20s who got a job working for the town as a garbage collector. And it wasn't like today when you're driving a truck and and they pick up the bins and they dump it in with the big mechanical arm. No, back then it was two guys hanging off the back of the trash compacting truck, jump off at each house and empty the garbage cans into the thing. And so he was working, and it was the first day, and he was getting hazed by the driver and by the other guy in the back. And halfway through his shift, he's just like, fuck it, jumped off the truck and just escaped into the woods, just ran off. Okay, that's what we did. Cops chasing you, run into the woods. You need to sneak out of the house, run into the woods. So much stuff happened in the woods of North Jersey when I was growing up. I so associate the woods with my youth. And this poem kind of encapsulates that. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised.
Cavalry Audio.
Ever since the forested valleys, lush meadows, and forbidding swamps of New Jersey has been a travel corridor between Boston and Philadelphia, there have been reports of a strange beast terrorizing the countryside. The descriptions vary somewhat in the beast's size and ferocity, but in most ways the reports are strikingly similar. A long horse-like face, horns, leathery wings, a forked tail, and cloven hooves. In colonial times, this creature was known as the 13th Child, or the Devil of Leeds Point. But today, this monster of the woods, known in folklore and urban myth, goes by a different name: the Jersey Devil. So what would be the Mount Rushmore of mythical creatures? Bigfoot, obviously, the Loch Ness Monster, the abominable snowman, and I guess chupacabra? Not a bad list. There's a good chance that most people would combine Bigfoot and the abominable snowman, so let's do that. What would occupy that last slot? The Jersey Devil, of course, the subject of countless excursions into the Pine Barrens in South Jersey, through the Delaware Valley in North Jersey, and everywhere in between, in search of this elusive prey. Stories of breathless encounters with the beast have been documented by law enforcement in every county in the state. There are reams of police files complete with photographic evidence of cloven footprints, mutilated livestock, and banshee-like screams in the darkness. The creature is also responsible for two bona fide public panics, one in 1763, another in 1909. In both cases, the risk was considered serious enough that people were instructed to stay indoors, while the local military, as if on full-fledged training maneuvers, combed the wilderness for any sign of the winged menace. The origin stories of this New Jersey legend are almost as varied as the sightings themselves, but the one most generally accepted has to do with a local politician, printer, and secret Christian occultist named Daniel Leeds. Mr. Leeds bore the unfortunate burden of having his first two wives die shortly after marriage, neither producing a child. His third wife, however, would prove to be up to the task of providing the large family that Leeds always dreamed of. A total of 12 healthy children over 20 years blessed the family with untold happiness, but the 13th would be a different story entirely. The story goes that as soon as Mother Leeds went into labor with this, her 13th child, she immediately knew that something was terribly wrong. According to the official record, Mrs. Leeds was in incredible pain, far more than even natural childbirth visited upon the mother. And more than that, she was terrified. Just as the baby was about to enter the world, through her pain and fear, she proclaimed, "Oh, let this one be a devil!" To the utter shock of everyone in the room, a devil is exactly what entered screaming. This spawn of Satan then spread its leathery wings, killed everyone in the room, and escaped up the chimney and out into the woods beyond. This is Dr. Brian Regal, Associate Professor of the History of Science at Kean University in New Jersey, and author of the book, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil.
Daniel Leeds is this very important, kind of lost character, not just in New Jersey history, but in American history, in colonial history. We said that had he been born, say, a generation later, and if he did the same things then that he did when he was alive, we would be talking about him as one of the founding fathers. He's a really interesting guy, self-taught scholar, a Quaker who basically bucks the system and decides he wants to bring the ideas of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution to colonial America. And he runs into lots of resistance for it. And he writes a couple of things. He creates an almanac, all of which get attacked by his fellow Quakers. He's not just the first author in New Jersey. He's the first censored author in New Jersey. His first book, The Temple of Wisdom, is only known from one copy, which is in the Pennsylvania Historical Society in Philadelphia, because all the other copies were burned. I had to go all the way to London to find an actual, genuine, original copy of his first almanac because all of those were burned by his sort of opponents. And so what happens is they thought he was getting too much into what they considered the occult.
So when I found that professor from Kean University and I read his book, I knew I wanted to talk to him for the show, and I was hoping he would say yes, and he did. And super intelligent guy, Jersey boy to the core, and he knew this stuff like backwards and forwards. And not one bit of woo-woo in the guy. Right? Like nothing supernatural, nothing like there's a chance that this is true and that this is whatever. And I really dug that about him. And at the same time, he was open to listening to some of my crazier ideas about the research that I had done and some things that I had learned that I wanted to run by him. And look, to his credit, he could have like shut me down and said, "Stop, you sound like a moron." But he was like, "Oh, I didn't realize any of that, what you just said. So let me kind of look into it." And then, he never called me back.
The Leeds family name kind of goes into decline. What happens is by the end of the 19th century, into the 20th century, people think this Jersey Devil story goes all the way back to the colonial era. It doesn't. It's an early 20th century invention. And some stories start to spread around southern Jersey and Philadelphia, Camden, Trenton, about weird footprints in the snow. Should sound very familiar. And so a couple of different people, sort of old-timers say, well, when I was a little kid, my grandpappy talked about something called the Leeds Devil. Maybe it was the Leeds Devil. And when that happens, the guys at a dime museum in Philadelphia, the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum, which was a very popular place at the time, they sort of heard this and thought that they had hit a gold mine. Because now they're going to start cranking out these fake stories about a monster running around in the woods, and they wind up taking a poor kangaroo that they got from Albany, New York, and they painted it green and attached little wings to it and put it on display in the Dime Museum. And one of the guys who's running this whole thing thinks that Leeds Devil doesn't quite sing. And so he comes up with the idea of Jersey Devil, and that just kind of takes off, and everybody wants to see it, and the Dime Museum makes lots of money, and big crowds show up, and you get newspaper articles all over the place. And then with all such things, people begin to realize that that's just a kangaroo painted green. And so the Dime Museum, washes this poor animal off and takes the wings off and ships it back to Albany. And says, well, it was a hoax. That people say, well, why did you hoax that? And you're like, hello, this is the Dime Museum. That's what we do for a living. We hoax things. We make up stuff. And so they thought it was over, because they were carnival hucksters who came up with sort of a little bit of an idea to get people to come in, and it worked, and now it's over. But what happens is the legend takes on a life of its own. And people start saying that they saw it, and it was running around the woods, and it left tracks, and it stole my lawnmower, and I saw it in the trees out in the woods, and and here we are.
But he had some great insight to the folklore of the Jersey Devil, and he had some really interesting stories, and he cleared up a lot of stuff for me. And at the same time, it didn't diminish any of the stories that I knew growing up, and I'm sure it wouldn't diminish anyone else's either. For example, the half-man, half-deer beast that roamed the woods of Sparta Mountain Road. So Sparta Mountain Road is scary. It just is. And why? I don't know. It feels like you're on a mining trail with all of these like switchbacks, and it's just woods everywhere. And then there's these outcroppings of rocks that are sheer and you could like fall. They're like cliffs and stuff. And before the main route between Sparta and Jefferson was open, that was how you got there. That was how like the initial settlers crossed Sparta Glen to get into Berkshire Valley. And nowadays, I don't even know who drives it. We would only do it like if we were like begging my mom, please let go of Sparta Mountain. Let's look for the beast in the woods, whatever. To be like, fine, we do that. And, eyes peeled, looking out the window, steaming up the window as you're like looking out in the middle of winter, in the barren trees, like going forever. And always thinking that you're going to catch a glimpse of this half man, half deer creature that's roaming the woods. And I would hear about it from like babysitters or friends of my parents, and it would just conjure all of these images in my mind and all of these fantastic stories about what it could have been or how it came about or, where does it live and what does it eat, and all of those crazy kid kind of fantasies or imaginings. And it wasn't like something that I obsessed about, like every day I'm going, where's the deer creature, dude? No, it was like driving over the mountain. You think about it. And then as you get older and you're driving over Sparta Mountain Road just for kicks, and you remember, like, gosh, when I was a kid, I used to look out the window and try and find the half deer, half man creature. And then you kind of like, just in case, is it around, right? And then when you hear stories about Clinton Road, like the D'Annunzio kid with his Buick in the 50s and going, and he sees something in there, which sounds just like it. So that's what I explore in the second half of the episode, which we'll get to later, is these enduring myths and these enduring beliefs that for one reason or another, they stick around with very little kind of deviation in terms of eyewitness reporting or frequency or evidence left behind, like footprints and stuff like that. Like, for whatever reason, these stories persist. And not just in Jersey. Every state has their famous cryptids, from, Bigfoot on down. And it appeals to some state pride and to state identity, like the hockey team, the New Jersey Devils. Great, love them. And the New Jersey Devil is a great demon. It's a great beast. It's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of famous creatures, like I talk about in the beginning of the podcast. And more than anything else, it's ours. Just like Sinatra is ours, and like Bruce Springsteen is ours, and Tom Cruise is ours. The New Jersey Devil is ours, and we're proud of it. But if you believe the good professor from Kean University, all of those myths are ultimately false. Or are they? We'll get into why they may not be next time on The Devil Within. This has been Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Redux. Gosh, I'm really enjoying these Redux episodes. I hope you are as well. I hope you're watching Let the Devil In on MGM Plus. It seems like you are, because the show's doing really, really well, and I couldn't be happier. So if you've been watching, thank you so much. Please let me know in the comments. Email me at info@evocreative.com. I read and respond to every email. I'd love to hear from you. Please make sure you're following the show on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And any kind of rating or reviewing or sharing of the show helps the algorithm and lets more people discover it. So I would appreciate any help you could offer. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Branden Morgan.